Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 178, and I have James Bovard, Jim Bovard, longtime libertarian investigative reporter. He's written about a dozen books all the way back to the 90s about various ways about how the government makes our life more difficult. His most recent edition is Last Rights, although he's had books like Lost Rights, the Fair Trade Fraud, Terrorism and Tyranny, Attention Deficit Democracy, The Farm Fiasco, Shakedown, Freedom in Chains, The Bush Betrayal. And he's had a few translations as well. How are you, Jim?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me on the show, Chris.
Yeah, it's good to have you on here. You know, Jim, I just want to go over a big picture here. And just first of all, I always like to start off, how did you become a libertarian, and how did you get into all this?
It was part of the terms of my parole. No, I was coming of age in the 70s, and that was when a lot of the wheels were coming off the myth of American government and democracy, and you had. Plus, I was interested in rare coins from the time I was pretty young, so I was following the gold stuff, the silver stuff, and watching the treachery the government was doing on the currency and how that was spurring inflation. And then from there, then comes Watergate, and the Vietnam War collapsed in a heap of lies and deceit and betrayals. And then there was Gerald Ford, So it was a difficult time to have faith in the government. I became interested in philosophy and started reading a lot more books that got my mind more awake. And then I started reading more in the direction of individual freedom. I think I always had kind of a gut sense, putting a high value on my own independence and being able to march to my own drum. So.
Yes, I do wonder if maybe the Times really did produce a lot of that, because we had this, the start of the Libertarian Party and some other movements that happened back then, although they, in the long term, didn't have much impact. But there seems to be something going on there. Who were some people you read back then?
Well, it's funny because, a lot of philosophers. I was reading Thoreau when I was 18 and did a story. One of my stories I enjoyed writing the most was about 4 years ago for Counterpunch. It was entitled Losing Thoreau in Boston, about my experiences living in Boston. And, there was a gospel of Thoreau that you don't need this or that, or you can survive with almost no money and all this. And I came to recognize that if you didn't have enough money for beer and condoms, you didn't have enough money. So I kind of backed away from that. But it was funny. I went to Virginia Tech off and on for a couple of years and dropped out, did not finish. But they had some very good speakers, one of whom was William F. Buckley. And Buckley came to the Virginia Tech campus and gave one of his canned speeches. And it was about this book called Road to Serfdom by Hayek. And so I went to that speech, loved it. The next day I got the book, devoured it. And that really set me on more of a path, because before that I'd read Capitalism and Freedom and other books like that, but there was Hayek put it in so much better philosophical and intellectual history context than simply raw free markets.
Yeah, I think Road to Serfdom is an excellent introduction book, and of course we're looking at about the 80th anniversary of Road to Serfdom. That
was a hell of a book.
Yeah.
And it was there was a grace to that book that Hayek did not achieve in his other writings, to put it kindly. There were other folks I saw when I lived in Boston. I went to the Ford Hall Forum and saw Ayn Rand's. I guess that was one of her final speeches there, her annual speeches there, and she was fascinating to see, and that was fascinating to see how it resonated with most of the audience, with a few exceptions.
The Ford Hall Forum was in Boston. Well, for some reason I thought it was in New York, but well,
no, it was definitely
yeah,
in Boston. It wasn't too far from Fenway Park.
yeah, and that wouldn't have been too long a trip for her anyway. So yeah, so and considering Ayn Rand never learned to drive, so she probably could have just
really
flown up or
oh
taken
my
the train.
goodness.
Yeah.
Well, it was like she was a native New Yorker.
She was in New York.
She wasn't. So
that was always something interesting that that was in her bio. I don't know if she was. It wasn't that uncommon though for a woman not to learn to drive the car back then. My grandmother was born in 1900. She never did. So.
Yeah, I mean, but you talk about a badge of independence. I mean, it was.
Oh yeah.
I think back to my own life, and basically having been raised in the mountains. Basically, when you got your driver's license, that was when your sex life started.
Oh, mountains. Where was this?
Mountains are right across from the start of the Skyline Drive, Appalachian Mountains of Virginia.
I certainly know that area. So this would have been Front Royal or Harrisonburg or Winchester.
Front Royal, yeah. I was raised just south of Front Royal, and that was before Front Royal got civilized with Interstate 66 coming through. Front Royal had been known as Helltown because of all the redneck violence there. You had there was a break in the Massanutten Mountains. You had the two forks of the Shenandoah River come together, so you had a lot of people coming in for whiskey and rowdiness back in the old days.
Oh yeah, yeah. The worst. I said the worst drunks are drunken rednecks.
I mean, there's a violence there. I mean, drunken rednecks, you avoid them.
One thing also that I noticed, there's also very much an apple culture there. There's a lot of apple orchards around there. If you wanted people to go over there in the fall and get their apples, it was a area.
Since you mentioned that, actually, when I was 15 and 16, I spent the summers working in orchards there, in a orchard right on the edge of the Shenandoah National Park, the land they seized during Roosevelt's administration. So it was like that was a formative experience. It didn't necessarily make me libertarian, but there was one old guy there who was working along picking the peaches, and he was a really unusual dude because he was the first grown up I had known who seemed like he's really cynical but happy. And so, and his name was Albert, and there were only two things he would say in response to everything around him. It was either "that really burns my ass" or "no shit." And so it was like, these are Albert's answers to everything in life: burns my ass or no shit. So.
Sometimes I wonder if you ever have a job or ever do any kind of work like that it just makes you more libertarian, because you realize, food has to be grown, or it has to be picked off the trees, or that there's a certain amount of work involved, and it doesn't just appear out of nowhere like so many people think that it does.
Yeah, and talking about jobs as a libertarian, the following summer, it was the only paid summer vacation I've ever had. I was on the payroll of the Virginia Highway Department. And that was where I learned how not to shovel.
Yeah. So you were shoveling for the Virginia Highway Department, or?
No. I said that's where I learned how not to shovel.
I learned how not to shovel. Yeah.
Where you just kind of lean in the shovel, look like you're getting ready to do some work, but that was a hoot of a job. A lot of wild characters, and it was a very good intro lesson in political economy, because you see how the government did things. And there were some guys there that worked as contractors on the weekends. And, at one point, the highway department wanted them to build a road in the back part of the county. And they were saying, I don't know why the government's having us build the road. Private companies are going to do a lot better, faster, and cheaper. And that stuck with me.
Yeah, it does. That was a fairly exciting, you look back at the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Granted, I'm a libertarian, but I love roads. We were building so many roads back then. I mean, putting in all these new freeways, like I-81 still being built then. I-66, as you pointed out. Yeah.
So since you know those roads, did you live in Virginia? Are you from Virginia?
I'm originally from West Virginia, but I know that I certainly know that area because I've been around there plenty of times. My dad was at Van Hill Farms
Oh
many
yeah,
years ago near Manassas, and
that's
my
was
brother was
that
at Quantico. I
CIA
mean,
or
I've been all over that area, and I always loved maps, so I always knew where all these roads are. I mean,
that's a rare virtue. So
yeah,
Van Hill Farms, was that CIA or the Defense
that
Intelligence?
was just the Army.
Okay.
It was an old base. Dad was in the 50s. I think
Okay.
that might have been after he was in Korea. Or no,
Okay.
not
Well.
well, Dad was in the Korean War, but he was on Okinawa. But yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he was lucky he never had to go to Korea, fortunately. But yes, but
Yeah, I mean that was a meat grinder.
he certainly hated Okinawa. Well. One thing that MASH does get right, though, as they pointed out, Korea is also very hot and very cold. I mean, it's a hard place to live just for that reason alone. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't help if you're way up north, next close to the Chinese border, and you got to have a 500-mile retreat or whatever. So.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, that had to be formative, though. Yeah, that area in Virginia. So when did you then get in, into start writing and doing all these books? Or maybe you started with
Well,
articles.
I was going to Virginia Tech. I dropped out of there in part because I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I figured having a college degree from Virginia Tech would not open the doors that I wanted to target. So I just started writing. Most of the stuff I sent got rejected. I had the reject slips taped all over my wall at one point, and then the wall got crowded. So I thought, well, maybe that's not a good idea. The first place I sold an article to was the Foundation for Economic Education, the Freeman. Paul Poirot there bought a book, no, bought an article, I'm sorry, in 1977. And then I sold a piece of Boston Globe the following year, beating up on the Postal Service, calling for the end of the postal monopoly long before it was fashionable. And I was amazed the Boston Globe would go with that because they're a liberal paper, but maybe the Globe had been screwed so many times by the Postal Service. They're like, yeah, let's punish these rascals.
Yes.
And then the following year, I managed to get a satire piece into the New York Times on the failure of the all-volunteer Congress. That was about 4 or 5 years, 6 years after the start of the all-volunteer military, and a lot of the members of Congress and others were saying, well, it's a failure and we need to bring back the military draft. And so what I did is take their arguments and apply them to Congress and say, yeah, by the same standards, Congress is a failure. And it still is.
True. Yeah. And if you've gotten into the New York Times, I would say you've probably arrived. Well, maybe not, but still, the New York Times was, if you're writing articles, that had to be one of the holy grails to get your articles in.
Well, it was a nice antidote because there were so many folks I knew that were saying, you're a failure, you'll never succeed as a writer, give it up, go back to college. But so then 6 months later, I had another humorous piece in the Times and Chicago Tribune, Washington Star, a bunch of other places. I moved to Washington, D.C. in mid 1980. And one of the places that was not impressed was Heritage Foundation because I was looking for work. And so I applied there, and I had this job interview there, or a referral interview, whatever. And so it's a hot June day, and it's a bad sign when the guy comes out wearing a vest and a three-piece suit. Because I'm thinking, okay, it's about 107 degrees outside, but this guy is very coiffed. Yeah. And he just kind of, and I sent him my resume and a bunch of clips from the New York Times and other places. And he's sitting there and he's reading the top. Oh, you want to be a writer? Oh, I see you're published. New York Times, Boston Globe, Washington Star. Very nice. And then his eyes go down to the bottom of the one-page resume. He says, "Oh, Mr. Bovard, I see that you didn't graduate from college." And I just sit there and smile. He says, "Well, Mr. Bovard, you've got to pay your dues." And I just about burst out laughing. And then he says, "So finish up college and come back to see us in a few years." And the interview ended about that point because I was like, oh, this is such a load of shit. So.
Yeah, and some of those organizations like the Heritage Foundation, I can imagine they were very you probably would have had to wear a tie to work every day, and you don't seem like the kind of guy who would want to do that.
Well, I have a necktie. I wear. I have more than one necktie, and if necessary, then I wear it if it's appropriate and all that. But it's like, I mean, there's, I have enough bullshit in my life without, you know. And it was one of the things that struck me coming to DC in the 80s and be here for the 80s was how low the intellectual standards were and how low the literary standards were. I mean, I had, at that point, I still had doubts about my own writing, but to see what was esteemed in Washington, D.C., in conservative circles as well as liberal, I mean, the standards it was so lame. The writing was so bad. The arguments were bad. It was, so much bootlicking. It almost made me cynical.
I can see that. What was that a fairly exciting time? At least what was the vibe in Washington at the time? Because that was Reagan. Did it seem like do you think, I guess what I'm trying to figure out here is what did people think about Reagan, and did they think Reagan really was going to cut the government, even though, as Murray Rothbard pointed out, the only program that ended in those 8 years was the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit? Or what was the mood at the Heritage Foundation and some of these other places?
Good question. I was an outsider. I mean, shit, I've been an outsider forever. So, I mean, there was a lot of enthusiasm early on at the Heritage Foundation. I mean, the Reagan administration was great for their fundraising. I guess it was about 2 years into the Reagan administration, they had their opening for their glorious new headquarters on Capitol Hill. At the time I went there for the interview, it was like in a ramshackle old wooden building on the edge of the safe part of Capitol Hill. So, so many of the conservative groups went upscale. Some of the libertarian groups eventually followed them. I mean, Cato at the time they first came to DC it wasn't a townhouse. I guess it was an old house on Capitol Hill that was, it had a lot of character. But then they moved down to Massachusetts Avenue with a big glass headquarters, and there were a lot of changes in that institute during those years. So,
changes at Cato.
Yeah. So,
what kind of changes?
I think that they became more mainstream. So, I mean, if you look back at 1990, I think that was one of Cato's finest hours. They were very outspoken against the start of the first Gulf War. And they were one of the very few voices in DC that did that. And they took hits on that on fundraising because a lot of their wealthy donors wanted to jump on that bandwagon, or at least not risk antagonizing President George H.W. Bush. But Cato was very stout on that. You flash forward to 13 years of the invasion of Iraq, different story. So
yeah. And then this was in contrast to, say, some of the other organizations like the American Enterprise Institute.
Yeah. I mean, it was Cato was much, much better than AEI. And it's interesting. There were guys I knew that worked at AEI. Some were really good guys.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, if you look at the foreign policy slant there, it's like they had taken a vow to never learn anything and never forget anything.
Yeah. Jim, I don't think people realize just how significant that first Gulf War was, because this was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it really was. And there was this mood that, the evil empire is at least not the evil empire anymore. And we can all, not get involved and come back home and be the America that the founding fathers envisioned. And then, Iraq attacks Kuwait, and I was 19 at the time, so I was certainly thinking about the military, and then Bush gets us into this war, and which we didn't have to get into, and really didn't impact us at all, but And the worst part is it ended up being very popular.
That was interesting close. And most unfortunate, yeah. I mean, I was, at the time that Bush was pulling the nation into the war against Saddam. I mean, I was, my view was, look, the Soviet Union is still there, and there's still a threat, and it doesn't make sense to be putting most of our military resources, throwing them into a squabble between two Arab dictators, which is what the Gulf War was. I mean, the original pretext, and the U.S. government had done so much to bankroll and arm Saddam Hussein, and then all of a sudden, well, he went too far this time, so we're going to destroy him, and end up starving his, bringing the sanctions and horrendously punishing the Iraqi people for so many years.
One thing else too, though, isn't this also, could you say that when we saw maybe an increase in the police state, what did you start noticing in the Reagan 80s and maybe even going back to the 70s?
Well, I was, the first piece I did on making marijuana legal was in 1983. It was for the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, and it had a headline, something about the marijuana ban is un-American. And so I was living in the edge of Cleveland Park at that point before it got gentrified in the group house. And so I took that piece to a photocopy place, because you had to go to photocopy stores back then. It was so long ago. And there was some old geezer there. I had to hand the paper to him. It wasn't self-service, and he looks at the article and says, "Oh, this is a terrible article. I don't know why you'd write that. This is an outrage." And so I said, so I basically just kind of took it back and went elsewhere. Never went there again. But it's like, it was tragic to see how the Reagan administration revved up the drug war. And, again, going back to some of my early formative experiences, when I worked for the Virginia Highway Department, 1 or 2 days a week, I'd work alongside a gang of convicts. And some of them were in prison for drug charges. And there was this one black dude, nice guy, for a convict, who was telling me his story. And he'd been busted for heroin dealing. And he said, I was guilty, but, there at my trial, prosecutors bringing this guy who claimed I sold him heroin. I never saw that guy before. It was all a setup. So, I mean, he wasn't that bitter. His sentence wasn't that long. He'd be out a couple of years after that. But it helped give me a sense of how a lot of these, for the drug war, the prosecutions were often complete bullshit. So, but the laws were also bullshit. So I guess that was consistent.
Yeah, but so they brought in a fake witness, or that's very interesting.
Well, yeah, and to be sitting and shooting a shit with him, and he was credible because he said, "Yeah, I was guilty." I mean, and there was, it was just, there were a number of the convicts that, it seemed like not bad apples, and then there was this one guy, this really bulky, huge guy. White dude who was in prison because he beat the hell out of his girlfriend's husband. It's just kind of like, you didn't want to make that guy angry.
Yeah, I think there's usually one guy like that. It's kind of interesting, and of course, one thing else we should clarify too. This was an era when you were a writer, you still had to use self-addressed stamped envelopes, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, it wasn't like you just said shotgun emails. So no, and that was probably an advantage because it meant that the slush pile was not as large.
Yes, it wasn't as large, but there's still a slush pile. But you also had to make an effort to write these letters, and as much as you talked about privatizing the post office, you had to make use of it quite a bit. It's
oh god, well, part of the reason I hated the post office was because they were so slow, and I was hostage to them. It's funny. The first piece that the New York Times took from me, I had, as you said, I typed out the article and sent it to them in a self-addressed stamped envelope. And then I was checking my mailbox and I saw that I'd gotten a postcard from them. And I was thinking, those son of a guns didn't bother sending back the article. I'm gonna have to retype it completely before I
jeez.
resubmit it someplace else. But then I flipped over the postcard, and it said it was a tentative acceptance. So I said, okay, well that's different.
Oh wow, yeah, but they paid for their postcards. That was cool. Yeah, yeah, that was a interesting time. Yeah, you got accepted by the New York Times though. That's yeah. So when was your first book? Which was your first book?
First book was 1989, Farm Fiasco, with the Institute for Contemporary Studies Press.
The Institute for Contemporary Studies, you said?
Yep, yep.
I don't remember them.
They vanished long ago.
Yeah.
They were a conservative-leaning think tank that I guess wanted to be a policy player. It was, you know, I fought wars with at least one or two of their editors. I mean, because I'd done a lot of articles on agriculture policy for New York Times, Wall Street Journal at that point, and so they asked me to write a book, and then all of a sudden they're asking for that the book start out being very reasonable and even-handed, and well, we're going to take a look at these programs and try to understand what the costs and benefits are. And my attitude was that was bullshit, because anybody that ever seen anything that I wrote knew where I was coming from, and I wasn't going to do this kind of pantomime, is that the right word? This kabuki theater of let's weigh this and let's weigh that. No shit, the verdict's in. The verdict's in. Here's why I despise the programs. Here's why they should all be abolished. So,
yeah. What were some of your main arguments against the farm in the book?
The farm programs were a waste of money. They were paying farmers to leave idle 60 to 70 million acres of good farmland each year to try to prop up world grain prices. The U.S. was playing the OPEC of grains, but it didn't have the market cornered.
Yeah,
it was a stupid policy that started in the 1930s, and they just never got around to getting rid of the policy. Yeah. It was immoral to be given these windfall subsidies to big landowners or any landowners. It was messing up the markets. It was making the American diet worse. It was spurring the substitute of sugar price was driven up, so food manufacturers switched to high fructose corn syrup, and that's had a lot of very unfortunate effects. So and plus it was an issue of freedom, because there were marketing orders that dictated exactly how much of the harvest a farmer could sell. I mean, that was bizarre. So.
Yes, Isabel Patterson pointed out in God of the Machine that this is the one civilization in the world that has never had a famine.
Interesting.
I often wonder if this is if these farm policies might bring us to that. What if farming went completely laissez-faire? What do you think would happen?
Farmland values would fall initially. Farming would become more efficient. You would have fewer whipsawing of the prices. I mean, things would be more stable, predictable, and more rational. Farmers, there is a stereotype of farmers being dumb that goes back. I mean, H.L. Mencken propelled that. But farming at this point is a capital-intensive business, and you got farmers are probably a lot better educated than they were even 50 years ago. So. And that's part of the reason that they're so productive. Yeah,
and farmers are always the ultimate do-it-yourselfers. I mean, if their tractors break, they try to fix them themselves. They're always, they're always that way. It's I wonder too, though. Would our food just be better? Maybe we wouldn't have as much. We have all these corn subsidies, and that's why all these corn products are so cheap. But we might be eating better food. Yeah, So what was after Farm Fiasco? That was
I did a book called The Fair Trade Fraud, looking that was when protectionism was becoming very fashionable. Happy Plan was pushing that very hard. That was a core of his presidential campaign. So that was fun to smack around. And that got translated into Japanese and Korean. The farm book got translated into Japanese, I think.
Yeah.
And so it was fun to go up against what was, you know, but flip side is it's kind of sad because you walk through the arguments of the protectionists and you mock them and scoff and walk people through the rationality of how America cannot become more prosperous by letting businesses charge higher prices. But here we are 30 some years down the road and we're hearing exactly the same stuff from Trump, a lot of his supporters. So
yeah, and as you pointed out, we don't really have free trade as much as we just have more and more regulated trade.
It's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah. I mean, there's a myth of, the myth of free trade, that the U.S. has been victimized by free trade. Yeah, it's like, it's amazing the BS that gets shoveled. I guess that's the kindest way to put it.
Yeah. There's some truth that we can't really consume more than we produce. But what I've always wondered, how much do you think that, going off of gold impacted us having all these trade deficits now? Because we bring in so many goods, but we don't ship out nearly as many.
I think there's been a huge amount of dislocation because the U.S. dollar became the world reserve currency, which basically gave a credit card to the U.S. Congress and presidents to spend money that they had not raised from taxation. Yeah. And so it meant that the federal government could become a lot bigger than what Americans would pay for. And it's just, it's been a domino falling against American liberty.
Yeah, what I also remember is it seems like there was, and granted, I was just discovering the liberty movement at the time, but how controversial was NAFTA among libertarians?
It wasn't that controversial. Most of the opposition to NAFTA was from protectionists. I did a story for Wall Street Journal editorial page in the summer of '92, pointing out that NAFTA wasn't free trade. It was instead you were given trade preferences to Canada and Mexico over other countries, and that was not necessarily a good idea or even a ticket for prosperity. And if you look at the rules of origin in the very complex NAFTA agreement, it basically made a mockery of open borders, of any semblance of open borders.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
Well, I mean, was it really about free trade, or was it just creating this bureaucracy over the three countries, the North American Free Trade Agreement? I mean, I think that's what some people worried that it was doing,
Yeah, I think that there was, it was the Bush administration trying to stretch their political influence.
Yes.
And then the Clinton people followed. So, I mean, there was so many different levels of dishonesty with this. But most of the attention in public was on whether free trade was good, and simply because it was called a free trade agreement, people said, "Okay, well, it's free trade." It's like, okay, that's So anyhow, but
yeah.
there are other things that have done more damage than that.
Well, I've always had the attitude also that taxes are evil, but tariffs are less evil than a lot of other taxes too. So,
Well, I mean, it's a question what the tariff level is, and some of the Trump folks are talking about putting a 10% across the board tax on all imports, which is just incredibly stupid. To put a tariff on something which is not produced here, it's the most inefficient tax, and it multiplies as it goes through the commercial chain. So it's like, anyhow.
Believe it or not, and I think this is something that's going away, but in Argentina they have export tariffs. You have to pay a tax to send stuff out, which of course means that nobody sends anything out.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that the major agriculture nations have done off and on. It was big in Africa when Africa was starving, a few decades ago. So.
And that's one thing. If we got rid of all these farm subsidies and could get it over there, we could send all this food over to Africa or these other places too dry.
As long as we weren't dumping on them. I mean, dumping our surpluses, which has been the U.S. policy going back to the 1960s. So,
Yeah, that's a problem too. You dump all this food and then they can't ever, they become dependent. They don't, and it bankrupts the local farmers because they can't sell their food.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's been a huge trouble in Haiti. So, it's,
Oh, really? Haiti. Yeah.
God, yeah,
Well, we
yeah.
could certainly talk about Haiti. You want to talk about I mean, the worst country in the Western Hemisphere. It's always been. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
In spite of the Clinton Foundation helping them.
Oh, yes, the Clinton Foundation. Yeah, that was a. So then after that, you went to you had a few more books. I think Freedom in Chains and Shakedown.
Yeah, I basically, after the trade book, I shifted to civil liberties.
Yeah.
And was writing more about that, and it was resonating more. Books were selling better. Lost Rights sold over 50,000 copies. That was in the 90s. So that came in handy. So
yeah, Lost Rights. Yeah, you went from there. Yeah. And,
yeah.
and
go ahead.
Was there any place where you saw any cases where liberties were moving in a positive direction? Because it seemed like to me a lot of this stuff is moved in the wrong direction in the last 50 years. So.
There are areas. I mean, there are areas. I say that, and then I'm like a deer in the headlights here. The internet, at least initially, opened up doors to a lot of material, books, videos, art that people would not have been able to find otherwise. I mean, those freedoms are being rolled back. You're getting a lot more government thumbs on the users there, but it's interesting. There was a friend of mine that was talking about how Uber was a great example of how people have a lot more freedom, and he was talking about how he took the Uber to the airport, and I said, yeah, and you got to the airport, and then you had TSA. How'd that go? Well, yeah, but so there are areas where you have more freedom. But then there's like TSA where you have a hell of a lot less freedom. So I don't know. It's certainly the trend line on freedom is going in a bad direction, and it's like the 1990s were practically a golden era compared to now. So.
Yeah, in a way, it seems like maybe it was a golden era for the internet because we were able to have all the benefit. We were able to have a lot of the benefits of it, but not the pitfalls that came with now being connected all the time.
Yeah, well, it's just amazing to see people who are wedded to their phones and are almost unable to make eye contact, and it's like, it's a level of okay. People have hindered themselves with the phones because the settings of my phones, it's rare for me to get any alert, and usually if it does come through, it's like, the hell is this? I was trying to think, I was trying to write, and then so I mean, Facebook, Twitter, I don't get any alerts. I mean, social media, no alerts. So people don't value their own mental focus anymore. Not everybody, but so many people have thrown it overboards, and it's just sad to see that people are missing their own potential. So
yeah, it really makes me wonder. So where okay, so what was after that? We had a Freedom and Change. Yeah, there was Public Policy Hooligan.
Yeah, that was a fun book. That was my memoir adventures I had. Some of the women that tried to stab me. Some of the places that I went to extra lengths to get stories from. We'll just leave it at a euphemism.
Yeah, and then there was a. Think if that would that have been Attention Deficit Democracy or Feeling Your Pain?
Yeah, the Attention Deficit Democracy was 2006.
Yeah,
that was the last book I did for St. Martin's. They were, yes, period.
So how many books did you have with St. Martin's? Because that's a pretty mainstream publisher.
I think 7.
Yeah,
7. I think, yeah, maybe
Yeah, what happened there? Or just parting of the ways, or better deal somewhere
Change of
else?
editors. Change of editors. Some of the there was a variance in my sale numbers. There were a change in editors was probably the most fundamental thing. So.
Yeah. How has the whole publishing process changed since from your first book to your last book?
Well, software is a hell of a lot better, so that's great.
I can imagine. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, first book was trying to line up those damn footnotes, and it's like, oh my God, I will never have this again. So I think first book had 700 footnotes, and I was late, and it was the kind of I'd not done a book before, so I figured, well, I'll just take care of the footnotes at the end. It's like bad idea. So.
Yeah.
So from there on, I was always, inserting the footnotes, my sources as I went. Makes it light years easier. I've been lucky to deal with a number of superb editors over the decades. There are quite a few other editors who I dealt with once. It's like, oh my God, where did this person get this job? So, don't know. I mean, it's, I guess, the flip side of how asking how the book production process has changed is how has reading changed, and this might actually be a more important question at this point, because reading habits are very different than they were even 25 years ago. I think maybe because of the smartphones and culture, and it's interesting. Talking to young libertarians, it seems as if they're far more likely to spend hours watching podcasts than they are to buy or read a book. What's your impression?
They might spend more time listening to podcasts. I can see that. I myself, after a while, I vowed I'm not keeping any more books because they're just too much of a hassle. I can put 1,000 books on a laptop, and that weighs less than one book.
Yep.
I mean, it's just so, and I can imagine you probably had your first manuscript typed and you sent it off to a publisher as paper, and they had to rescan it or what? I mean,
well, it was there were all kinds of jobs I had, in my early days before the cash flow as a writer, and I was a Kelly Girl typist, so typing has never been a problem. But I typed it myself and all that stuff. But I don't know. But it's interesting talking to people. There's some wonderful podcasts out there, but there's a level of precision that you get from reading printed stuff, even if it's digital version, that you don't get from listening. What was the Francis Bacon line? Writing makes an exact man, and then there's a third part. It would help if I could recall the quote. But 400 years ago, he had a nice line. Let me pull that up here. So
yeah. Well, you know what? Also, I wonder if the publishing process takes as long, because sometimes a book will be accepted and it might take a year. But
yes. Come on.
And of course, the other change too is we don't have all our great libertarian booksellers like we used to. I mean,
good old Andrea Rich. She had a very positive influence. So the quote is, reading makes a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man.
Oh, wow, yeah.
From his essays, probably 400 years ago, roughly, maybe a little more than 400. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know if the younger libertarians will know the joy of getting a book catalog in the mail once a month. It was
Andrea Rich was great, and she had Roy Childs for a number of years. He was great. He was a very graceful writer. So
this was Laissez-Faire Books, which was one of the go-to places. You could go to a few, but they were probably the one place that brought everything together. They had a lot of interesting stuff there. small stuff, big stuff, and you definitely had some things in that catalog. I think
Oh,
you
yeah,
might have
yeah,
I think you
yeah,
might have been on their cover a few times because
yeah.
there'd be a cover
Probably
up, there'd be
so.
one book on the cover, you know.
Yeah, it was funny because I had to elbow them to carry the farm fiasco, and Howie Rich was either running it or co-running it with his wife Andrea. And
Yeah.
Howie says to me, "The farm book will never sell. It'll never sell." But it sold very well for them, and I appreciate they helped put it on the map.
Yeah, and Andrea Millen Rich is gone and Roy Charles is gone, but I believe Howard Rich is still around, right?
Yeah, he's still around. He's done a lot to help a lot of libertarian causes. Plus, he seems like a really nice guy, which is
Yeah.
not automatic when you're dealing with folks at his level. So,
Yeah, and there was also Anita Anderson was there. I believe that was her name. Yeah, there was. They had maybe 3 or 4 people. They did a lot of good work, and that was all. You know, that was also a good place where you got all the libertarian news. I mean, you know, every once in a while, Andrea Millen Rich would say, you know, so and so died or something like that. It was it's just amazing how we got through all this before the internet. You know, I realize 53. I'm the last I'm the last generation of libertarians who got his education from book catalogs. You know.
Well, I mean, it was a great place to start. So, but something I'd be curious to hear is your thoughts on the state of the freedom movement, because you mentioned that in an email ahead of the interview, and that's something that you've been immersed in for many years, and I'm interested to hear your take on that.
I'm really troubled by it because the whispering around COVID when we should have been screaming is just very troubling. It seemed we were screaming when the war on terror and all this other stuff started, but then after this, it just seemed like we were neutered.
Maybe I think I mean certainly for the Beltway libertarians, yes, you're 100% right. There were others that did raise hell. Jeff Tucker at AIR, Bumper Hornberger opposed it. The Macy's folks opposed it. Ron Paul opposed it. However, you know, there were a lot of others that were like, you know, okay, well, you know, thank God for the booster number 6.
Yeah, I don't know where. Did you see something like this coming? Because you've been around for a long time too. You know, it's just.
As far as seeing it coming, no, I didn't see this coming, and it's something which I'd written ahead of. I think I wrote that, you know, some years before the pandemic arrived, and I said that, you know, that that many Americans are complacent and would roll over for almost anything except the government taking their guns or padlocking their churches. And well, I guess I was wrong on that second part, because a lot of places those churches were shut down, the synagogues, the mosque, everything else was shut down. And there were some wonderful lines. I've gotten Last Rites, the new book, about the some of the dissents in there, because there was a case in I think the state of Nevada and allowed churches to only have 50 people at a time, but for the big casinos they could have hundreds of people. And I think it was Justice Gorsuch who dissented, like, you know, nowhere in the Constitution does this gambling casino have more First Amendment rights than the church. So there was pushback. I was, you know, living in Maryland. The lockdown came early here, and it's sort of like you're standing on the shore and watching a tsunami wave coming at you, and you're kind of thinking, hell, it can't get this far, can it? I was wrong. It did. So I think about the only selfie picture I ever took was once they mandated a mask for going to grocery stores. I went outside and put my mask on and my sunglasses and my railroad cap, and then took a selfie shot just after I put a big cigar sticking out of the mask.
Yeah, I don't know. It seemed like, I mean, whatever you can say, it was certainly a pretty well executed psyop. It certainly suckered the American people, but I don't know how. You know, I think you can agree if we'd not had the sheepish reaction in September 2001, we would not have had this happen in March of 2020.
You know, maybe, probably. I mean, well, it was worse than sheepish. It was groveling. It was like,
oh, yeah.
In the weeks after the 9/11 attacks, the percentage of Americans who trusted the government to do the right thing, that percentage doubled.
Yes.
And that was a Pandora's box, and it's vexed America ever since, and much of the world. But it's interesting. So, you know, writing about freedom issues for decades, it's almost like you're in a battle line, and you're watching a slow retreat going on year after year. But at a certain point, there's a break in the defensive line, and the opponents, the big government folks, whatever, come pouring through. And that's what the COVID lockdowns were. And then the mandates. So I was, you know, living in the DC area, you know, I was out hiking almost every weekend. And after the lockdown started, people would see me out in the C&O Canal towpath, and they'd literally start screaming and cussing at me because I wasn't wearing a face mask. And so I just say, you know, tell it to your therapist.
That's a great answer. Yeah, that's truly amazing. You know, I have to admit though, I was probably more black-pilled in September of 2001 than I was in March of 2020. So it's like, well, this didn't really surprise me that much, you know, because I said, but some of the younger libertarians definitely got more. They were definitely more, and I think we did get a crop of new libertarians, but it seems like the opportunity to seize and get them into the liberty movement wasn't necessarily utilized. So
yeah, that's putting it kindly. That's putting it very kindly.
You know, I think the funny part for me, Jim, you know, is especially back when I was at Liberty Magazine in the 90s, we certainly thought of Cato and Reason as being more libertarian than the Mises Institute, and I don't think we do that anymore.
Yep, there are some fine folks at both those places, but yeah, COVID was not their finest hour.
I really am trying to look at everybody as an individual now, because there's still a lot of good work. There's still a lot of good work coming out of these organizations, and there's still and I've learned from this show that there's so many people doing so much good work that it just don't need to focus on the mistakes or the failures.
That's very wise.
Yeah,
it's unusual for a libertarian, but it's wise.
I realize to a certain extent it kind of drives you nuts if you do. It really does. It's hard enough to be a libertarian. It's hard enough to make a living at it, but you know, it's or try to make money off of something like this. But at least you can try to focus on some of the positive stuff. Although, are there any other areas that you seem to think are moving in a positive direction? I mean, I think one area that is positive, we do have more legal marijuana than we used to. And it looks like it's also opening up with some psychedelics, but
well, I mean, as far as evidence of progress, it's been great to see the improvement in the quality of American beer. I mean, this is a big change in the last 40 years. I mean, there's the drug stuff has opened up. There's a big backlash against that. It's just sad to see. So a key part of the defense of individual, a key part of the defense of individual liberty is individuals having good bullshit radars. And if people don't have a BS radar, they're going to fall for every damn scam that comes out of Washington from either political party. And this is what's been happening. I mean, it has intensified in the last 10 years. The hysteria, the counter hysteria. It's amazing to see how much crap the ruling class is getting away with.
Jim, I suppose you're familiar with the H.L. Mencken quote. Quote, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, parenthesis, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, parenthesis, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary," end of quotation.
Yeah. Well, bogus fears can lead to
Yes.
real servitude. So,
And you know, and you do seem very Mencken-esque. You know?
oh, all right. Well,
Yeah.
thanks. I mean, he's at his best. He was wonderful. He had a great style. It's been interesting to read. There are a number of very good biographies of his life,
Yeah.
and to see the twists and turns, and to see how he managed to land on his feet after being basically out, blacklisted a number of times. So he was very impressive.
Yeah.
That was back when Baltimore was a great city. So
yeah, Baltimore was and I don't know what to say about Baltimore now. It's all just falling apart. It's definitely not what it used to be. Maybe it was because they lost the Colts, but
well, the Colts left because the city government was getting ready to use eminent domain
yes,
to seize them.
yes,
I
exactly.
mean, this is just, I mean, this is such treachery. It's like, so the politicians start talking about robbing you, and you're supposed to wait until they do the dirty deed. It's like,
yeah,
I mean, it's funny to see how the narrative on the Colts leaving in, was it 1984?
83 or 84. It was
Well, okay, at some point early 80s. I mean, it's complete crap to leave that detail out of the narrative, like it was the team owners who were scoundrels. It's like, no, you've had horrible politicians in Baltimore going back at least 70 years. So,
but doesn't that say something about capitalism? Is because they could call somebody up and get all that stuff moved in one night. And
it's impressive. Yep. I mean, I'm just glad I never had to move a football team in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that's well, you hire the right people moving all that. You just have an empty building left. It's it's quite unfortunate that story doesn't really get told. The Colts and things like that. I had one person on here said actually the sports media is more leftist than the regular media, and I think you're probably
really
right. Yeah,
well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there are storylines that the sports reporters seem to glom onto, and and some of them do superb work. Some of them were much better writers than the political reporters, but. No, I mean I've been appalled at a number of their stories, and so anyhow.
Yeah, if you don't want to answer this, who specifically? It's fine, but who specifically disappointed you the most in 2020?
I mean, as far as you mean politicians or
Coronavirus
writers,
stuff. Coronavirus stuff.
Oh God, I was disappointed. Governor Hogan shut down Maryland. That was a jolt. I mean, okay, New York State, Jersey, yeah, okay, kind of expect that. Maryland should not have done that. Donald Trump signed on to the lockdowns and signed the bill that changed the election procedures that cost him re-election. So, I mean, that was dumb as crap on his part. I mean, Trump is a head shaker because there are some issues he says some very good things on, but a lot of the people he had around him were pretty much clueless or worse. And for him to sign on to the Fauci show was a disaster. Biden was worse in a lot of ways, and he certainly propelled the fear. And that was how he won the election. Because if you look at the breakdowns on as far as Democratic voters, I think that they tend to overestimate by tenfold the number or the number of people that went to the hospital with COVID or died of COVID.
Oh yeah.
And so and Biden was out there. Biden, in his statements, he would exaggerate by 100-fold or 1,000-fold the number of people that died of COVID. And it's just the fear mongering was a disgrace. But then, I mean, this is how Biden's done his entire career. So
yeah, well, I guess what I really mean is who among people that we considered libertarians.
The Cato Institute.
You don't want to say that, yeah, that's fine. But
yeah, I mean, I assume there was some split opinions at Cato. I think that they went along quietly for a lot of stuff. When the vaccine mandates came out, my memory is that there were at least some higher up people there that supported that.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, I think Reason magazine came out in favor of some of the worst policies, or at least to not vigorously oppose them. There were, there were folks at the national level in the Libertarian Party who did speak out. People forget that Jo Jorgensen, maybe late in the campaign, but she did condemn a lot of the policies.
Yeah, Joe and Spike did, although they weren't very. They did a little bit because, but so many of their speeches were just a boilerplate libertarian speech, and it wasn't really customized.
Okay, well, yeah, and I mean that's a huge lost opportunity. I mean, maybe that's the best phrase of the pandemic and COVID being a vast lost opportunity for libertarians, because this is the ideal issue to educate and rev up folks. But if you can't explain the lies and if not, in some places the venality. I mean, to see what Pfizer got away with a rubber stamp from the FDA in the Biden White House, holy crap.
I think the most important thing for libertarians to do is now is just every time somebody says something, make sure you correct them. So, well, when somebody says something like, well, my business was going great and then the pandemic happened, I said, no, the pandemic didn't shut down your business.
Oh yeah, very much.
Just make sure you say that. No, it wasn't the pandemic that shut down your business. It was policies that shut down your business.
Yep, it was government decrees.
And if we can somehow win that battle, I think we've won something. But
we won something. But I mean, okay, so I've been fighting a lot of these issues for a long. So it is discouraging to see, like with the Congress a couple of weeks ago. I mean, in 2018, the FISA Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was extended with Donald Trump's endorsement. But it was one of the provisions was that the government had to report how often the FBI violated Americans' rights with warrantless searches with the data that was seized by the NSA, and it came back. It was like 2 to 3 million times. So, I mean, okay, so the law is completely failing to uphold the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable warrantless searches. And then Congress rolls over in that crap and makes the law even worse, extends it, and so now you got FISA at the comfort inn. Yeah. It's like, hell, if I'm ever going to use their Wi-Fi network.
Yeah.
As if the feds didn't have me in their sites already.
Another thing that gets some attention in libertarian circles, that happened under Trump. What do you think about FOSTA and SESTA?
About what?
FOSTA and SESTA.
Which is?
FOSTA is SESTA is the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, and FOSTA is the, I think it's Fight Online Sex Trafficking. It was basically the law that, this law was why Craigslist killed their personal ads.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Or these laws were why Craigslist, and I know Norma Jean Almodovar are certainly opposed to it. A few other people are.
Yeah, there was the lady at Reason, Elizabeth
Nolan Brown.
Yes, she's done some very good work on this.
Yeah.
It's this. I mean, it is appalling to see how little support there is for free speech at this point in this country. And so I haven't. I did not follow those controversies, but I was sad to see some of the like those. I never use the Craigslist personal ads, but it seemed like a safer way for a lot of that business to be done than to be out on the street. So.
Yeah, it was just one of those. Yeah, I'm worried too. I mean, what do you think about what's happening with online censorship? And again, this is another I mean, you want to talk about another organization that's really disappointed me. Where's the Electronic Frontier Foundation?
I think that they were opposed to the FISA extension, or maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't know. I mean, there's, to see the kind of censorship proposals being thrown out there at this point, it's like, holy shit, how much worse can it get? Maybe it will get worse. I mean, it's like after the, when the COVID crackdowns first started, people think, well, at least they won't shut down everything, but nope, they can do that. So I don't know. I don't know.
Well, we now have this, business where the government is basically contracting out its work. I mean, indirectly or directly. And, now there's this reasoning. Well, for example, if we hire a company to do it for us, it's okay. And someone would say, well, they're a private company. Said, no, they're not, but not when they're on the dole like this, when there's
working as a government agent. Yeah. I mean, that was a huge issue for the censorship industrial complex.
Yeah.
You've got all these contractors are out there just telling Twitter, kill this, kill that. So,
and Jim, really, when you look at the big picture, though, this really started when all of these big tech companies went into China, and that was 2005 or 2006, because China said you can't come here unless you censor these people, and they said, okay, we'll censor them.
Interesting. Okay, that's a good point. I'm not well informed on that.
But it rolled off from there, and where do you think? I'm also got to ask, what do you think? Maybe this isn't something you cover much, but what do you think about the various regulations and attempt to stamp out cryptocurrency and Bitcoin are right now? Or have you thought much about that?
I haven't followed that. I mean, it's certainly a peril the government could stamp out any type of financial innovation or property rights. So. And people got property rights in crypto, and the government should respect them.
Yeah. Well, there's also the problem, too, is it's direct competition with the dollar, which they very much want to protect. I mean,
they do seem biased.
Yeah. I got to ask, what is the book that you're most proud of?
Oh God, I guess Lost Rights.
Yeah,
I mean, that was one that it was a hell of a struggle to write, but I've heard from so many people that have changed their lives that because I was trying to walk people through to get a radically different conception of what government power is, and to have enough, historical examples and research and current controversies, and to also make it readable, or hopefully make it readable, so that people get a few laughs as well. So, and that's I'm glad how that book is stuck around. So let's okay. So thanks for the question.
Most of your books are pretty much. Do you think a lot of the lessons and things in the older books still apply? Because you're always talking about current events.
Yeah, I mean, farm subsidies are still a boondoggle. Trade barriers are still a scam, and Bill Clinton is still a rascal.
Who's still a rascal?
Bill Clinton.
Oh yes, Bill Clinton. Yes, although he was better than what's come after him, but yes,
he was smarter than what came after him. I'll certainly give that.
We had budget surpluses.
Well, that was thanks in part to the Republican Congress, but
true, yeah, that was the best case scenario.
Yeah, but the thing about Bill Clinton, he was the last president who really paid much attention to federal policy. So because everybody since then has been kind of a drive-by. They'll make a few speeches and they'll do the photo ops, but they have not had the handle on it that Clinton had. So
the agencies just do whatever the heck they want.
To a degree, or it's up to other people in the White House to call the shots. So,
Yeah. Are there any conspiracy theories that you think are valid or think are baloney?
It depends on how you define conspiracy theory.
That's true. Well, views that weren't mainstream or not the winners telling the story. I mean, we could talk about Pearl Harbor, we could talk about John F. Kennedy, we could talk about the World Trade Center, we could talk about, yeah, that's true. There's a lot of, there are a lot of conspiracy theories. Some of them are accepted, some of them aren't. Yeah.
There was a line that I had a piece a couple of years ago. It said that I said that conspiracy theories have multiplied almost as fast as government cover-ups. I think that they've fertilized those conspiracy theories.
That's a good way to put it. The cover-ups come with the conspiracy theories. Yeah, it makes you ask, what are they covering up? It's not
they're covering up a lot. So,
well, what kind of plans do you have for the future? I mean, you're with the Libertarian Institute and some other good people there. I mean, you still seem like you are enjoying yourself, and you still seem like you got a lot of life left. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time.
Oh, thank you. So I'm happy that at the 1 hour and 10-minute point, I've not come across like a corpse.
Yeah.
I'm writing for a bunch of different places right now. I've been doing a bunch for the New York Post and doing stuff for Mises and Hornberger, Future Freedom Foundation, other places. So, and Libertarian Institute. So,
yeah.
I'll just keep writing, and hopefully things will get better for freedom. I don't know. I mean, I still enjoy writing. I still enjoy trying to make people laugh, and doing a little more with the video stuff lately, and that's gone a little smoother than I expected. So, it's a living. It's a living.
Have any of your ideas or attitudes changed in all this time?
Oh, sure. That's a good question, but I mean, yeah, I mean, a number of them have, but in some ways, I'm more cynical than I used to be. So,
I wonder if that happens with all of us.
Well, maybe. I mean, I had more hope that freedom could be revived before the pandemic. But I mean, there was such a sea change after 9/11 that was perhaps as big as what happened during the pandemic. I mean, to see the amount of deference and to see the to see the banishing of dissent that happened after 9/11. So,
yeah, the trading of liberty for security has never worked.
It has gone badly in this century, very badly.
It fails every time. I don't know where we go from here. I have to say the one thing that gives me most hope right now, and I'm got to know what your point is. What do you think about Javier Milei in Argentina?
I hope it goes well for him. I hope he can become an example to other nations and other politicians. I'm waiting to see how it goes. I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Watching that has also shown just how difficult it's going to be. But I think it's you got to have somebody who really is really smart and really knows what to do. And I think he's got that. I hope it does inspire other people, though. Yeah.
I hope he survives.
Yeah. So you've stayed in Northern Virginia. It sounds like or around that area most of your life. Is that right? Or have you lived anywhere else?
I was born in Iowa, raised in the mountains of Virginia, lived elsewhere, Boston and various places. But yeah, I've been in the DC area for much too long. So
yeah, it's expensive. Well, you can live anywhere now.
Yeah, I'm writing about government stuff, so it's like, it's it helps to be here, but with each passing year, it's like, do I really need to be here? So,
yeah, you can sometimes go to the parties and maybe get to good research. I mean, as long as you have access to a good library, that helps.
It does. Yeah. It does. And, I hear some good stories sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a lot of good stories. We've seen a lot of things go on. I say sometimes too that I think maybe the liberty movement has a broken heart, or maybe the Libertarian Party does. We'll see what happens if it can go through this. I don't think Milei's election would have happened without all the Corona stuff. But the most disheartening thing is all these governors and people got reelected.
Even Whitmer, even Whitmer. So
Oh
yeah,
gosh, Whitmer.
yeah, it's grim. I
Yeah.
mean, people don't seem to be drawing the right lessons from the pandemic, but it's like, it's something you and I have been fighting on these issues for decades. It's like maybe things will get better, or hopefully at least things will get worse slower.
Yeah,
That's
Jim,
a positive spin.
yeah, if you do leave the area, you should maybe go up to the Free State. And it's not
It's
that far.
cold. It's cold. I spent one winter in Boston. It was like it was
Oh,
damned unpleasant.
was it that much worse than Northern Virginia, though? I mean,
Well, much worse, much worse. Yeah, I
now
was
that is,
there. So I was there for the Great Storm in 1978, and it was thanks to that I had the only good line on my resume from Boston, and that was that I did path-breaking work at the Harvard Business School.
oh
So
wow,
I was living there, and the storm came in, 3 feet of snow in one day. I heard the Harvard Business School was hiring snow shovelers. So I hustled over there, worked 43 hours over the next 2 days, and I was out there clearing the sidewalk so I could, forever after, I could say I did path-breaking work at the Harvard Business School.
yes, you did do path-breaking work at the Harvard Business School. They never check out stuff like that.
Oh,
Like
that's true. That's true. I mean,
I
there's
mean,
so many different levels of bullshit
they'll
here.
find out.
So, yeah.
Okay, okay. Jim Bovard did work there. Yeah, he worked there. They'll verify that, but that's and now, of course, Harvard and some of these other campuses are completely, overrun by whatever. It's very interesting to watch that happen.
Yep, it's a mess.
Well, yeah, it's well, I understand. I hope if you leave Virginia, I hope you find a good place to land. I don't know if I recommend Texas, but Florida might be nice, or Tennessee. I'd definitely go to a state with no income tax. I mean, that's
a good idea. Yep, I appreciate that.
There's more and more libertarians who are just leaving the country too. I definitely, Jim, that's one thing that bothers me too, though, is that I'm very worried that there's a growing anti-immigrant sentiment in the liberty movement.
Interesting. Do you think that's because of the Mises caucus or what?
I think it's just another psyop. It seems like there's definitely different people saying things about coming up with these theories on immigrants. It's not, and and for me, I always say, well, I want open borders because I want to be able to go in and out easily.
Yep.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah, I had enough trouble with the Iron Curtain back in the communist times in Eastern Europe. It's like,
did you go to Eastern Europe?
Many times, yeah.
Or well, as they say, Central Europe. Oh, really? What were you doing over there?
Investigating. I did some stories for New York Times and Wall Street Journal and Reader's Digest and other places. So
on what was happening behind the Iron Curtain, really?
Yeah. As far as how the environment was collapsing, how the economies were collapsing, and this is before 1988 when the shit hit the fan. So, 88.
Did it surprise you, or were you pretty much, or was it pretty much?
No. Bucharest, Romania surprised me. It was so chilling, but Hungary did not surprise me. Czechoslovakia surprised me a little bit. East Germany, they're East Germans. What do you expect?
That's very, that was a side I never knew yet. Well, Romania was the only one that ended up being violent, and they ended up killing Ceausescu.
It had a happy ending
on Christmas Day.
It's the best Christmas present Romanians could have gotten.
I mean, that happens in 1989, and Gorbachev resigns on Christmas in 1991. I've often wondered, did they do it on Christmas on purpose? It seems like they did, maybe because, but
maybe I don't know.
Also, I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Lawrence Reed's story about being detained in Poland. He's gotten awards. He got the highest award that can be given to a non-Polish citizen from them. And it looks like to me that's one part that maybe there's at least some sympathy toward free markets. I mean, I think Western Europe is completely screwed, but
maybe, I don't know. It's but you know, freedom has lost a lot of
Yeah,
its cachet in the last few decades, and that's a
yeah,
very dangerous trend.
yeah. It's yeah. Well, it's certainly nice to hear too. You actually came to liberty via William F. Buckley, which is just shocker. But
Yeah, well,
Hayek.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. If I was handing any book out to try to convert people, it probably would be Road to Serfdom. I think it's very easy to read. I mean, you know, I mean, some economists cannot write for the common man at all, but he definitely could. That's a good book. It's
yeah, it was superb, and it had very nice paradigms where you walked through, and it to help show the similarities between the Nazis and the communists. So
yeah, I think it, and when people still talk about that so much, it just shows this is what happened there. And when he reasoned, well, you can't have a free press if you have price controls and production controls on paper. I said, well, yeah, you're right. You
yep,
can't.
yep.
So
Well, World War II taught that. So
yeah, it was really and I think we got that book in 1944. We got God of the Machine, Discovery of Freedom by Rose Wilder Lane, and The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand in 1943. It's sometimes the greatest light does come out of the dark. It's yeah. Well, do you have anything else to say before we go, Jim? It's been great
no,
having.
I'm kind of getting ready to scramble here in a couple of
Yeah,
deadlines. But hey, thanks
yeah,
thanks so much for having me on your podcast. Thanks for all your
yeah,
thoughtful questions. Thanks for having a handle on my career that I can like I can do some skeet shooting here. So that
yeah.
was
Well,
fun.
I like to look at the whole person. I like to have something in depth, and you're at jimbovard.com,
Yep.
and you can also be found at the Libertarian Institute, which is that with some other good people like Sheldon Richmond and Scott Horton and Laurie Calhoun and some younger folks too. Yeah, but
Yep.
you're one of the old you and Sheldon are the old guys there. But yeah,
Geezer alert.
yeah.
Found that geezer alert.
Yeah, both of you have done a lot of good work. So thank you, Jim Bovard. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out my Substack, go buy my novel, Escaping the Village. Thank you, Jim Bovard, and we're out.